You're good? Okay. Hi, everyone. Like Ross said, this will be our workshop focused on applying to different fellowships. And this is presented to you by EBRC's Student and Postdoc Association. And so let's get straight into it. So first, let me introduce some of me as a host, and then also some of the other moderators. So hi, everyone, my name is Ava. I'll be hosting and talking through some of the basics of fellowships and basically the general breakdown of our workshop. And the rest of the people on your screen are actually the moderators and panelists later in the presentation. And I'll let them introduce themselves after I introduce myself. So hi, everyone, my name is Ava. I am a third-year PhD student in chemical engineering at the University of Washington, and I was awarded the NSF-GRFP in 2020.
Hi, I'm Ross. I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at the University of British Columbia, and I did my PhD at MIT previously. I got the honorable mention so close twice for the NSF-GRFP, and I'm currently have a postdoctoral fellowship from the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research up here in BC.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Yan. Like Ross, I am also currently a postdoc, currently at Caltech. But prior to postdocing, I was a graduate student at Georgia Tech. And when I applied in 2017, it was actually the year when they changed the guideline where you can only apply once as a grad student. So you can no longer apply like twice as a first year and second year. So I applied in the 2017 cycle as a first year graduate student and received honorable mention.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gabby. I am currently a second year at Princeton. I got the NSF-GRFP last year, 2021, which was my second time applying.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey Gray. I'm a third-year PhD student at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And in 2021, I was awarded the DoD Smart Scholarship.
Great. Okay, so let's, now that we know our host and moderators, we can go straight into the rest of our time together. So this is the basic agenda for today's workshop. So we're gonna really quickly intro some national fellowships, talk about some specific application components for one of these fellowships, the NSF-GRFP, and that's the one that we're gonna focus primarily on in today's workshop. And so during the actual workshop, with your moderator, you'll be storyboarding personal experiences, using an example statement to highlight different application components, and then use your personal experiences that you storyboarded then to highlight the same application components. And then after that, we'll do some background on scoring criteria that the NSF-GRFP reviewers look at and some tips and tricks from them themselves. And then at the end, we'll have an open question panel with some of the previous awardees and honorable mentions, and also give you some additional resources and some concluding remarks. And so let's get straight into the workshop. And so this is basically the first chunk. And so as you guys probably all know, engineering biology students can apply to a wide variety of different national fellowships. And these are, we've highlighted 3 different ones that are commonly awarded to synthetic biology students. So there's a lot of different national funding sources, so meaning like different federal agencies like the NSF versus the DoD. And something that I also want to point out is most of these national fellowships, because they do come from government agencies, do require some form of US citizenship or like permanent residency of some sort. And so we also, although international students can't apply to some of these different fellowships, we will be building materials that you can hopefully use for other fellowships that are not US government agency based, and then also for your graduate admissions if you are an undergraduate student. And so as you can see on the screen, there's a lot of different fellowships and a lot of different levels of support, a lot of different opportunities to apply. And so this fellowship panel, like I was saying before, is going to primarily focus on the NSF-GRFP, which awards 2,000 different fellowships each cycle across all of these different STEM disciplines. And it's one of the more well-known graduate level fellowships. And so that's why we decided to focus on it for this specific workshop. And so beyond the ones that are listed on the screen, there are, again, many other fellowships available to both domestic and international graduate students. We have a repo that we'll send out later if you're interested in those other fellowships. One of our panelists, like Kelsey mentioned before, actually was awarded this Smart DoD fellowship. And so later in the workshop, we'll during the question and answer panel, you'll be able to ask him questions about his specific fellowship if you have them. And so let's talk about the NSF-GRFP as a whole. And so some of this material is sourced from this Alex Hunter Lang website, and I would highly recommend looking at it if you have time later and you're serious about applying for this fellowship. And so for this process, you'll need to write 2 different essays. And so your first essay is going to be focused on writing a personal statement, and that will have both your relevant background and future goals, and then another essay that's going to be your research statement. So you can think of it as 2 different statements, personal and research focused. And in addition to that, you'll also be needing at least 3 letters of reference, or like recommendation letters from professors or other people who can talk about who you are as a student and who you are as a researcher. And I would hope if you're applying this cycle that you've already reached out to those professors and people, and hopefully you've started building some of those different connections. And so when it comes to writing these different essays, I would really highly suggest, again, looking at the NSF-GRFP solicitation itself for more specific details. One of the sections is going to be focused on what is considered an eligible versus an ineligible project. And I think if you're writing a proposal, especially if it's health-related applications, they have more specifics on what is considered like a project that you can actually write about versus not. And so I think their main criteria for the NSF-GRFP is that you're furthering fundamental research within whatever area, even if it's health-related. And so very overall, with these 2 statements, you basically have 5 pages to sell yourself, and it's really important to give your reviewers a sense of who you are beyond your other documents. So with this application, you'll submit things like your resume or CV, your transcript, and with your application, it's really important for you to fill in the space between, tell them what they can't pick up from those other documents. And so I think in that respect, it's really important to remember that this specific fellowship funds the person and not the project. And so it's really important to make very clear why you're the right person to do the work that you're proposing. And so within these 2 statements, they actually require some specific breakdown within each of the statements. And then these 2 pieces are called intellectual merit and broader impacts. So intellectual merit is how are you demonstrating the potential to advance knowledge, and broader impacts are how are you demonstrating potential to benefit society. So how does this work and your previous experiences doing these 2 things? And it's pretty easy to fulfill these requirements in each of the statements. You just need to have clear headings in both of your statements where you're explicitly talking about intellectual merit and then explicitly talking about broader impacts. And it's okay if it's still confusing what these 2 sections are, because that's actually going to be part of our workshop later on. And so you'll get some more experience breaking down what is considered intellectual merit versus broader impacts. And so now we'll just go through a couple general tips about the NSF-GRFP. So like I was saying before, it funds the person, not the project. It's really important to write for a general science audience, because depending on your group that you decide, there's going to be a wide array of different reviewers within that group. And in the same kind of lane, it's important to get a diverse set of letter writers to make sure you have people who can talk about different attributes of you as a student and as a researcher. So maybe someone that knows you based on your community service that you do with a specific club, and then someone else that knows you for being a really good student on the academic end, and then maybe your research professor who has seen you publish with them or really emphasize your scientific knowledge. And so beyond that, I think it's also important to ask for help. And so something that I personally did a lot was have people from many different disciplines review my material. So I cold emailed a bunch of people at a bunch of different schools in a bunch of different areas that are all relevant to my specific research application. And I gave them my materials to read. And that honestly was probably the most valuable thing that I did in order for me to actually be awarded a GRFP. So I think building that network and having a lot of different people have access to your materials and give you feedback is one way to make sure that you are writing for a general audience and also have materials that other people can clearly read and understand. And so now that we've kind of broken down what exactly the NSF-GRFP is, what are the materials required for you when you're submitting for that type of fellowship, now we're going to actually go into the breakout session. And this breakout session is going to be focused on building your personal narrative. And again, I think it's really important to hit home that even if you're not applying to the NSF-GRFP this cycle, you could use the same materials that you're building for applying to graduate school or applying to another fellowship or applying to the fellowship next year or whatever purposes you need application materials for. And so hopefully this workshop, even if you're an international student, will still provide you with some basis for building this personal narrative. And so something that I've noticed in a lot of winning proposals that I've read is that they've all had this cohesive theme that's motivating both of their statements. And so before you even build either of your statements, you need to find your narrative. And so what's the idea or set of ideas that are driving your story? So like, what is your specific interest? Why are you doing the things that you're doing? And so this is just an example that I've put up on the screen. For example, we can take the idea or narrative of I am driven by curiosity. And now we'll talk about some like how we can apply that overall theme to a research statement versus a personal statement. So for a research statement, I think some of the things that you could talk about if your narrative is I am driven by curiosity is your motivation to understand how things work, how your research experiences focused on a specific mechanistic understanding, and maybe some extracurricular activities in building things from scratch. And so, and then on the personal statement side, you developed programs where you help others find their passions and you've found ways to just discuss your own curiosity and inspire your local community and younger scientists. And so you can work from the narrative down, but honestly, in my own experience, when I was storyboarding my application materials, I feel like it's really good to figure out what these pieces are and then find that cohesive narrative that puts it all together. And so that's actually what we're going to be doing today in the workshop. So this is our overall outline for the breakout session. I'll go into specifics of what the three pieces are, but what you're going to first do is storyboard your personal experiences, and then you're going to highlight your intellectual merit and broader impacts in an example statement, so an example NSF-GRFP, and then take your personal experiences and highlight that intellectual merit and broader impacts in your personal experiences. And so let's go straight into it. So in your breakout rooms, the first task is the storyboarding of your experience. What we really want to hit home about is basically applications shouldn't be the written version of your resume. If you're familiar with storytelling and production, many areas use this concept of storyboarding. So writers will outline basically or brainstorm different pieces of the story and then fill in the transitions and explanations between those pieces of the story. And so when I was writing my application, this is a concept that I knew of, and I found it extremely useful in building my application materials. And so basically what we'll do is we'll simplify this even further. And you can do this on a piece of paper or maybe on a Word document on your computer. You can write out all of your pivotal undergraduate and graduate experiences, whether it's research or extracurricular activities or like things that are involved in your personal life or other activities that you think were really instrumental, and then associate time periods with each of them. And then try to fill in those explanations between each of your experiences. So the first part of it is just basically getting everything written down on paper with a time associated with them, and then you can connect them together and then figure out what explanations fit between your experiences. And so some useful documents for you to potentially pull up is your resume and CV, and maybe some previous personal statements where you've talked about some of these big pieces. And so this first part will be focusing on filling in those pieces and what the reviewers are missing about your story. And then we'll go into highlighting NBI in an example research statement. So with your moderator in your breakout room, you'll dissect a shortened example of this research statement to determine which sentences qualify as intellectual merit versus broader impacts. And so your moderator will pull it up on their screen, and then you as a breakout room will all highlight that document all together. And then now that you know your outline of experiences and have a better understanding of intellectual merit and broader impacts, then you can tag each of your experiences with intellectual merit or broader impacts, and then start outlining each of your statements. And so that's like the general idea of what you guys will do in each of the breakout sessions. And if Ross is ready for it, we'll start splitting all of you up. But we can also answer questions really quickly if anyone has them, or you can ask them to your moderators in the room with you. But yeah, hopefully this is super fruitful for everyone.
All right, sounds good. So I'll pause the recording, and I've assigned people to breakout rooms, so you should automatically, hopefully, get sent to one. But I'll stick around in the main room until everything's set.
I was muted. Hi, everyone. I hope your breakout sessions were very fruitful. So let's get into the rest of the presentation and quickly to our panel. So now we'll really quickly go through the reviewer perspective when it comes to these fellowship applications. Also, Ross, do we need to start recording again? You're on mute, but yes.
I think it's back to recording now.
Okay, sounds good. So the reviewer perspective. So how do reviewers score the NSF-GRFP? So what they'll do first is split you into 3 different categories: undergrads, first-year grads, and then second-year grads. And then once you're split in those categories, the reviewers will review their set of applications and then assign numerical scores for intellectual merit, broader impacts, and then an overall score. And with those numerical scores, you'll be given specifically a label of poor, fair, good, very good, or excellent. And then all of these scores will then be normalized based on scores awarded to all of those applicants within the reviewer's pool for each category, and then used to assign a Z-score. So then everyone, based on their scores in respect to everyone else, will be assigned a Z-score for that specific reviewer. And then students with the highest Z-scores will be nominated for an award, and then students on the borderline or high variance across reviewers will be discussed by a panel. And normally if you get discussed, you're either very likely to get an award or an honorable mention. And so a lot of the times, people who are in this bucket are seen, like a lot of the honorable mentions are seen as equivalent to the actually getting the award, except they just had like a bad set of reviewers. And so this is like an example of feedback that you'll get back from your reviewers. This may or may not be one of my reviewer comments. Some of the things that I think are important for me to point out here is they can have very interesting responses to some of the things that you do. For example, they put my double major in quotations, even though it was an actual double major. Like I did chemical engineering and microbiology, but they said more or less that my double major was a pseudo double major, which is fun. And so, or like called me unfocused and confusing in some of my writing. And so you can still have some weird comments and still be awarded the GRFP. In another reviewer comment section, they actually gave me like fairs in both sections, but I guess that reviewer was harsh for everyone, and so I was still awarded a GRFP. And so some tips and tricks from a ChemE reviewer. This is actually material sourced from a Reddit post, and this was posted the April after I was awarded my GRFP, so like April 2020. And so if you want to hear more about like the behind the scenes of the reviewer process, I would definitely suggest going to this Reddit link. And basically, they were told to review applications holistically, which is very similar to how they do graduate admissions. I know there's often like a lot of talk about students who come from some more like highly ranked schools being more awarded for some of these different fellowships, and they actually had limited concern for institution bias, and it just so happens that those institutions have students that are more focused on research experiences and productivity. And so if you are having those same characteristics as students from those schools, you're not at a disadvantage not coming from one of those more like highly ranked schools. I think that's like a concern that some students have. And then broader impacts activities are regarded more positively if the student appears to be dedicated to them. So in your application, I think it's really important to highlight things that you've been doing over a longer period of time and not just something that you've just picked up your last year of school, maybe something that you've been doing since the beginning of undergrad or maybe even in high school. And in your writing, it's really important to use figures to maybe demonstrate specific research concepts. And you can see some examples of that if you go to that Alex Lang website that we'll link later. They have a lot of different resources and a lot of past research and personal statements. And another thing that you can do along the same vein is highlight key sections and statements using different formatting. So you can like make your sections really clear to a reviewer because they're reviewing tens of applications. And so making sure that it's really easy for your reviewer to get through your material by using different types of formatting is also very useful. And then there's definitely a balance that you need to strike between having enough detail to convince the reviewer why what you're proposing is novel, and then also a clear motivation. And so being succinct but sufficient is something that I think it takes a little bit of time and a lot of people's eyes to get the best, like to get hang of, I guess. And it's one of those things that once you like iterate with a couple of different people, you'll strike that balance. And so those are some quick tips from some reviewers. And now we'll go into our fellowships panel. And so this will be an open panel with all of the people that have helped you in the past, maybe except Gabby, because I think she has to run to another meeting. But you're free to ask any of us any questions. And also I think Kelsey's going to talk really quickly about the Smart DoD. If you want to, Kelsey.
Okay, thank you, Ava. So essentially what the Smart DoD scholarship is basically a one-to-one commitment in terms of support for service, right? So for every year that the Department of Defense pays your tuition and your stipend, you get that's a year of service you have to do for the DoD, which means it's not military service, just you have to work for the DoD at a sponsoring facility. So this could be the Army Research Lab, which is really cool stuff. This could be the Air Force Research Lab. This could be a bunch of different facilities, right? You can even nominate your own facility, which is pretty cool. That being said, this program is open to undergraduate students, master's students, and PhD students. It's a fairly new opportunity, and it's a great opportunity. If you want to learn more about it, I'll be happy to speak more about it one-on-one. I want to save some time for the panel, right? So.
All right, great. So we do have some questions that people put into their forms when they registered, but we'll just open it up to any question either in the chat or go ahead and turn off your mic and ask us, and we'll monitor both. If there aren't any immediate questions, we'll go to the pre-asked questions.
What are some things that you would say would impact whether to apply as a first-year grad student versus a second?
I can answer it if no one really wants to. Okay. So I think you can be successful as both a first year student versus a second year student. I do think that you have an advantage as a second year student because most of the time your first year you're still trying to figure out which lab you're going to go into, like what your research is, but by your second year and by the second year in graduate school where you're applying for the specific fellowship, you'll know which lab you're in. And so you can work with that professor and maybe use some preliminary data you've already generated on your project in order to write your fellowship application, which in my opinion will make it stronger. And oftentimes I think they talk about it a little bit in that Reddit post. That is more of what they're looking for in a second year graduate level like fellowship. They're looking for students who have already like begun to research something of their interest. And so I think you're gonna write out a more fleshed out a more fleshed out statement in order to be more successful your second year. Sorry, I don't know if that answers your question. I rambled a little bit. I got distracted.
Yes, it definitely means that they're going to be a bit more harsh probably if you're in your second year, and having some preliminary data becomes like increasingly necessary. When you apply in your first year, there's no expectation of the data, and the project is maybe your sort of first pass at trying to come up with something. You may even be doing rotations and not officially in a lab. So you can try to come up with something based on what lab you're currently in, or you can just write one based on a lab that you might join in the future. So it's not very strict in that regard, and they don't expect as much about what you've currently done because you basically can't have done anything yet. Unless I guess you're doing something computational and it takes you 1 week. But yeah, so expectations change, but also your capability to meet those changes. And if you feel like you'd much rather write this when you have a clear idea of your project, then definitely wait. But if you're okay with some uncertainty and you already have a good relationship, maybe with your current rotation lab or a lab that you're potentially doing a rotation in, I would say just go for that in your first year.
Yeah, and I think one of the benefit of applying as a first year would be you're actually able to design a project based on your like personal interest and present a proposal, and if it's a very strong proposal, whether it's funded or not, where you will be doing research in grad school may actually came out of that proposal. And I think that's like the coolest thing as a graduate student, right? You're able to like design your own research project based on personal curiosity. So I think as a benefit, if you already have like a clear idea, it's like, this is what I wanted to do and this is what like I want to accomplish in graduate school, it could be one of the benefit of applying as a first year.
Yeah, maybe we can say like what we wrote our projects on. So when I applied first as an undergrad, I like made some kind of weird fusion project of my undergrad lab and a lab at Berkeley that I was interested in, Jake Kiesling's lab. And then when I was a first year graduate student, I had started to rotate in a lab and I was taking a class with that professor. And as part of the class, we had a project that we were working on. So I sort of turned my project idea for that into also my project idea for my fellowship application and kind of did them together because it was a convenient way to sort of build off of an idea that I developed for, you know, something that would make sense in that lab. Oh, I'll also point out that I may have written my research proposal too good when I was an undergrad because one of the reviewers literally says, it sounds like one of the professors just wrote this for him. And I didn't know whether to be offended or what, but I didn't think that I wrote my research statement. So be careful, I guess. Anybody else want to talk about what they wrote about?
I guess for my attempt with NSF, right? I wrote the same project for both fellowships, right? It was more so which was basically I want to engineer fungi to solve the plastic pollution problem, and plastic is a good solution because I'm sorry, fungi is a great solution to plastic because fungi have similar mechanical properties as plastic does, and it's biodegradable and doesn't use fossil fuels, right? So, and by what I wrote for NSF, I wrote that my first year, and it was still, actually, I wrote both my first year. Whatever NSF, it just wasn't as it just didn't land as well as my DoD one because I was able to have more conversations with people within the DoD, which told me that they were working on a project that catered to that because the Army, a huge problem in the Army, for example, is pollution, right? And a lot of places that we occupy in terms of the US Army, we pollute a lot. So the Army was already trying to work on limiting the amount of pollution that occurs in that aspect. So a fungal biomaterials project aligned perfectly with what they wanted. So because of that fit, I was able to include that portion in my DoD application personal statement as opposed to my NSF statement, which I assume played a role in why I was successful in winning that scholarship for the DoD, but not for NSF. So that just goes to show that fit matters. Also, I had more of a passion. The pathway I saw for DoD was more clear for me because that's more so what I wanted to do. NSF, you have more freedom, right? It's kind of you have more freedom, I would say.
I think that raises a really interesting point. Like when we're applying to NSF, were we also like pursuing other fellowships in parallel, or like we specifically wrote a proposal for one agency only? So I'll like start, like I only applied to NSF, but like in hindsight, I wish I also like applied to like Ford Foundation. There's also Hertz, definitely the SMART Fellowship. I wonder like what other people did.
I applied to every fellowship under the sun, right? I applied to NSF. ChemE was a big one, right? ChemE is a fellowship that caters to master's and PhD students as well. And essentially what you do in ChemE is, it's for I think it focuses on underrepresented graduate students. But you look at the eligibility thing. And pretty much what happens is you get sponsored by a company, whether it's literally Ford or 3M or one of the national labs or Boeing or IBM, a company like that. And they'll sponsor you and give you tuition plus a stipend plus a summer internship. So you pay a lot of money, right? It's awesome. It's a great opportunity. So I applied to them, SMART, NSF, Hertz. There's another one. I forget what it's called, but it's similar to DoD. Yeah, I just applied everywhere. Apply for everything. Yeah, that's probably, I don't know off the top of my head, but that's another one. I didn't apply to NS. Maybe I did. I have a whole folder of stuff that I haven't looked at, but yeah.
Yeah, I applied exclusively to NSF like Yan. I also, to answer Ross's question, I did not do synthetic biology in undergrad. I was doing chronic lung biomarkers, which is like very unrelated to the things that I do now and unrelated to the things that I wrote in my proposal. I think it's important to like generate an idea that's like all your own. It doesn't have to be a good idea. Like I don't think mine was like a great idea, but I came up with this idea in undergrad, and then during the summer before I applied, and I took it to a couple professors at ASU, which is where I went to undergrad. And there I talked to them about like whether it was feasible, what I could actually do with that idea. It was basically building quorum sensing circuits in different microbes. And I proposed that project to actually like work on it at a lab at UMBC, where Kelsey is now. And I actually didn't even end up applying to UMBC. I just like dropped that name in my application because that was like the right lab to build that project in. And I honestly think that you can like say that you're going to a place to do specific work as an undergrad and not actually even apply to that place and use it as like, they have the right tools to do this thing. And so I'm going to do it in this place, but you don't necessarily need to go to that school. Like I didn't actually even apply to UMBC. I had no interest of actually going there. Sorry, Kelsey. But it actually like worked out really well because that lab was like perfect for doing the work that I was proposing. And I used one of their papers to build my project. And so, yeah, there's a lot of ways you can like manipulate the system to work in your favor. And so I would highly suggest doing something like that.
All right, do we have more audience questions before I have to dig into the form ones? Feel free to just shout out. We'll give it a sec.
Are there any fellowships anyone else is curious about that we've missed? I'm sure. Or any parts of NSF that we didn't address? Maybe we have students interested in postdoc fellowships as well.
Well, somebody asked in the form questions, and this would be most relevant for current first year students and maybe future. Okay, never mind. I'll hold that thought. How did you pick your recommenders? Good question, Kylie. All right, maybe we can each pop in here. But when I applied as an undergrad versus a grad student, I think I had most of the same ones. But then I added the rotation professor that I was doing work with that was like that would be the supervisor of the proposed project to one of my referees or my recommenders. But the other two people that I had were the professors I worked with in undergraduate. I would say at a minimum, you should have at least one professor that you've done some research with before. If you're currently a grad student and you're proposing research in a lab, you should include that professor likely because you're already a student and it's sort of assumed that you're getting into that lab with that professor. But it also is helpful to have somebody who's seen you outside of research, especially if you're going to make a point of doing outreach activities or any other things that would contribute to your ability to further broader impacts in sort of society or in the scientific realm itself. If you have somebody that can speak to that, then that's going to be really helpful as well.
Yeah,
So,
to kind of follow along what Ross was saying, I had my research professor from undergrad. I had one of my summer internship like PIs as my second one, and then my third one was the program director for this research fellowship that I got in undergrad, but through her, I was working for mentoring undergraduate students. And so I had like younger undergraduate students. So I was like a senior level, like a senior year researcher, but then there were students who were apprentices who were just shadowing in different labs, and I was mentoring them. And so she could talk about that very specific experience. And so I think it's important, exactly what Ross was saying. Sorry if I cut you off. Like someone who can also talk about your broader impact side of your application.
Kelsey, did you have something?
No, I was just about to send the link for the thing, but I can't get out this page. Oh, yeah, the link for the fellowship list.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I can talk about my recommenders. So I applied as a first-year grad student, and I had one letter coming from, the research professor from undergrad, and then another letter from the advisor for my project team that I worked on, and then the third letter came from the current professor lab who I wish to join. So I think in terms of thinking about recommenders, you want these letters of recommendation to like further like amplify or help the reviewer remember like the take-home message that you want them to remember, right? So these letters of recommendations can be like memory recall notes, because when these reviewers are writing these intellectual merit broader impact summaries for you, right, you want these letters to further like accentuate your message. So I think that's a good way to think about how you want to pick your recommenders that fits with your story.
Another general note is, oh yes, Becky preempted me by 1 second. Exactly what Becky said. Tell your reviewers or recommenders what you want them to talk about. So ask them to review. If they say yes, then give them some bullet points, tell them what you've done beyond the capacity to which they know you. And then because they need to have a clear expectation of what to write about and focus on and what to sort of mirror in your application, or to say that you might not have time to say in your application. So they can help round out your application in that way and reinforce the points that you're making. One person asked, and this relates to the storyboarding exercise so somebody asked in the forum, how do you link together our experiences in a way that appeals to reviewers, or maybe in a way that makes sense? So we have these different elements that we worked on today. We talked about how we can maybe categorize them or subcategorize them in terms of broader impacts and intellectual merit, but how would we actually put those together into a narrative? Anyone want to take a bite on that?
For me, I would say stick with the end goal in mind, and similar to what Ava emphasized in the storyboard thing example that she provided with the stove. Tell stories, ask yourself, so what, why, start with inspiration, and then from the inspiration, find experience, focus on one experience that shows demonstrated interest in what you're passionate about, or what that interest is, or how you demonstrated how an attempt for you to resolve that issue or overcome that challenge in your own way. And then leading up to that, keep asking yourself the why, the so what, and explaining that in your paper. And from there, you'll be able to figure out on your own and diagnose identify which experiences if you, especially if a litany of experiences, which ones will be most relevant or best? They're all relevant. They could all be relevant. Which one is the best that you want to showcase or include in your application?
Yeah, they don't want to see a resume. They already are going to get your resume and CV. So don't just write your resume out. Exactly what Kelsey said. The why. You don't have to list every single thing you did in your personal statement. Just think about what are the most important things that you did. Maybe some of those will be in your storyboarding exercise from today, and focus on those as evidence of you sort of taking interest in this field or pursuing your interest in this field, because that will give them an idea that you are like a interested or creative person or whatever it is that is like your sort of argument that you're making. And so how do you connect them together is, well, sometimes it's as simple as I was interested in this, so I did that. And then I learned this, and so I did that. And you can kind of string things together that ways. But of course, life is more complicated and we often pursue many things. So just try to be focused and say, these are the things that I tried out, and this is what I've learned from them. And then you can go into each one. It doesn't have to be perfectly chronological, but it should ultimately create the argument about, you know, you as an applicant have these great interests and have done some already important work along the way. And you hope to sort of continue doing this and get support from them to do that. Does anybody else have things to add before we get another question?
Yeah, I think cohesiveness is really important because, like, I think as scientists, right, these reviewers are scientists, we ask to ask questions. And when we like find a weak link in the story, we will ask like, why? Like, is that really true? And like, that's not what you really want when a reviewer is reading your statement. It's like, oh, when they start to get sidetracked and start asking questions rather than getting to know you. So like a strong, focused application personal statement is really going to help you out a lot. And I think one undervalued element in writing personal statement and also research proposals is also just to showcase like your excitement about the project, because I think reviewers who are reading these documents, they're like reviewing tens, if not like 20 applications in a day. So I really believe that like when they look at your statement and they can see like your excitement, your passion just oozing out of that blank screen of words, that's going to like make a lasting impact. That's going to make a strong impression in them, and like they will remember your application more.
All right, I think we have time for a couple more questions from the audience. All right, Tommy. As a rotation student, would it be beneficial to use my current project for the NSF, or would it be better to apply for the next cycle when I'm locked into the lab and have a more concrete project? Does anyone have a specific?
I can answer.
Yeah.
I also, he's a rotation student in my I think it's probably better for you to apply next cycle. I think with like the way that BioE rotations work, his rotation is only 8 weeks long. And so for you to get a good enough understanding of the stuff that we do, like in order to write a proposal, I think it would be difficult to try to fit it into the first couple weeks that you have, since the application deadline's in a couple weeks, like it's in 3-4 weeks from now. I would definitely suggest you to like lock in your lab, have a little bit more experience, a more concrete research project before you actually apply the following cycle. In my personal opinion, that's what I would do if I was a first year student applying or interested in applying. Because you unfortunately only get one chance in graduate school to apply, so it's better to make it your your best shot. Yeah, I don't know, do other panelists have opinions on this? Maybe apply to one of these other fellowships that we were talking about. There's a lot of other ones. But I definitely think saving your NSF-GRFP one is probably the better idea. I don't know, Yan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, right, like if you're undergrad, apply. If you're a second year graduate student, apply. Like for these two categories, the decision is really simple. As a first year, it really depends on your current situation, right? Like, do you already have 3 committed recommenders who can write you that really strong letter of recommendation, right? And you already have an idea of what you want to propose and a streamlined personal statement in mind. And if the answer is yes, like you can try at least like writing the whole application and then get some opinions. But I think as a first year, it really depends. It's like a very difficult decision.
Any final questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Like, what's the difference after you're getting the grant? You mean you'll be more confident, or you can be more proactive in terms of researching project, because you don't have to rely on the funding by your PI. You have your own funding. I want to know how's your feeling right now if you have once you have the funding.
I know for me, when I get funding, right, it's when I received my funding, I was able to do my own project, right? So that's a big one. So when you can do your own for example, my PI is still trying to get funding for my project. If he wasn't able to get funding for my project and I didn't have my own funding, I would have to do something else that would be boring in my lab. Yeah, with my own funding, I can continue to do what I want to do and what I care about. Also, with fellowships, you get awesome opportunity. You get to go to conferences. You get to do a lot of stuff. I know when I compare my experience in my lab to the experience of other people in my lab who don't have funding, I have the freedom to go to certain conferences, to participate in some activities and whatnot, because it's probably not fair, right? But I've been given certain freedoms because of this fellowship, and you get paid more. That's another one.
Yeah, I think similar to Kelsey, I got the NSF-GRFP as I was making a decision for undergrad. So I like exactly what Yan is saying. I used it as a negotiation tool. And so when I was going to schools with my NSF-GRFP, I was like, I'm funded already, so you should give me more than what you're giving other students. And so I actually got like supplemental money and privileges on top of like the base level stipend. And so I definitely use it as a negotiation tool when I was looking at schools. And I think there's a lot of like opportunities to participate in different like conferences and travel being a fellowship student that you wouldn't be able to do if you didn't have associated fellowships. Yeah, so kind of hitting home on what everyone said so far. I have experienced all those things.
Yeah, maybe one unseen benefit if you're currently an undergrad, or maybe if you're a first year, is that if you have funding and there's a lab you want to join that maybe doesn't have space or something, and that usually means like they don't have like funding to take in additional students. Maybe they take 1 student per year, but there's 2 students in your program that are interested. They can maybe make that extra space for you if you have a fellowship. And so it makes the decision for a PI to take another student easier if you have all this funding and you basically cost half as much to them. So yes, sometimes it can just be helpful to get into the lab that you want in the first place. Okay. well, I think that's our time. So thanks everyone for coming. We're going to continue to have workshops like this and fellowship and panels over the next year or so. Some of them will be aimed at younger students, some at older students. If you're currently a graduate student, and if you're doing anything related to synthetic biology, please join SPA. You can also join us and help out with these outreach initiatives. But if you're currently an undergrad, and you signed up for our email list or Slack, then we will, SPA is free, yes. If you're an undergrad right now and you want to stay connected with us, then we have the email list and the Slack option as a sign up. But if you decided that you did want to do those, sign up for the email list or our Slack, and you didn't before, there's a link to them in the feedback form. So check out the link to that. We'll send a follow-up email to everyone that registered with a PDF of the slides, and then several of the links to resources that we've talked about throughout today, as well as a marked up version of the document that we went through during the breakout sessions. So unless anybody else has some final thoughts, we can go ahead and end it there. Nope. Okay. Sounds good. All right. Thanks, everyone.